Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Oh, yeah. Live around the world on the internet at michaeldukeshow.com and across the state of Alaska on this yada, yada, yada. Stations, translators, the world. We're taking it over. That's what we're doing. We're taking it over to leave you alone. That's the whole goal of the takeover of the world. Is just then we could just leave you alone and go about our daily business. Welcome to the program. It is the Tuesday edition of the show, and that means that we're going to be talking with Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets here in hour one and talk about the weekly top three. That is the big three stories that he believes are important for us to be paying attention to this week. We'll be talking with him here in a hot second. In hour two, normally we'd be joined by Chris Story, but Mr. Story is indisposed today, and so he'll be joining us again next week. And but he did give me a topic. He gave me a topic. He's like, I'm not going to be there, but you could take this. So, business of forgiveness. That's what he says. He wants me to talk about the business of forgiveness. It pays profits for the one who forgives and yields interest to those around you. So I guess those are big boots to fill, man. I'm just saying, especially after talking to Brad, I'm going to have a hard time dragging myself up from the depths of despair to then, try and be all Mr. Positive. But we're going to do it. We're going to try, and we're going to get things rolling. But that's what's coming up today. Tomorrow, Mike Cronk will be joining us. In hour one, he's the candidate for the Senate seat that was vacated by Click Bishop. And fingers crossed, I got to verify again today, but fingers crossed, we will have Nancy Dahlstrom on with us tomorrow in hour two. Now, first things first, before I jump to Brad, we got to get over there real quick, but it's election day. All right. The primary election is today. So if you haven't early voted, and I know a ton of you, in the chat room anyway, have already early voted, then you're covered. But if you haven't early voted, today is the last day to go out there and vote. Really, especially for the U.S. Congress seat. That's the big deal, right? The rest of the seats, the rest of the other 50 legislative seats, there's only two that really are affected by this. But the U.S. Congress race, go out there and vote. Go get it done. So, there you go. Yes, the depths of despair, the pit of doom. No, it's not. It's Truth Tuesday. Come on. It's, sometimes the truth hurts, but that's how it works around here. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, joins us this morning to discuss wood ticks, lunatics, politics, and everything in between. Good morning, my friend. How are you doing this morning?
Michael, I'm doing great today. Does that mean you'll be the first to be able to ask Dahlstrom if she's going to drop out since she finished second to Begich?
I hope so, man. I hope it. And you know what? I'm fingers crossed we're able to ask that question, because I guarantee you that will be the first question I ask.
Which will guarantee that she will not appear tomorrow.
Because I'll be like, I think because if I was a betting man, I would lay good American green dollars backed by nothing on the fact that she probably is going to lose today. But again, I've been wrong before. I won't count my chickens before they hatch, so we'll see. But if that is the case, then yes, that would be probably my first question for tomorrow. All right, well, Brad, let's get off to the weekly top 3. It's full of acronyms: SBR, CBR, PFD, and then, of course, now the corpus. It's like they're not even trying to hide anymore. Give us your thoughts here on number 1 of the weekly top 3.
Well, Michael, we saw in the 20 teens, in the late 20 teens, the beginning of a series of articles about K through 12, right? That K through 12 was in trouble. We had to spend more on K through 12, that it wasn't keeping up with inflation, that, we had class sizes that were busting out. We had all sorts of issues. And the editorial pages were filled with one after another of op-eds on K through 12. We need to increase K through 12 spending. And so you could see especially when you look back on it, you could see this tank coming, or this cavalcade of cars coming at you for K through 12 spending. And we've seen what the consequences been in the legislature. Well, now we're beginning to see the same series of articles coming after on the permanent fund, and talking about the need to blend the two funds together, merge the two funds together, the earnings reserve fund and the corpus together, because otherwise we're going to run out of money. And the latest in that, which is always the harbinger of more to come, the latest on that is an op-ed that Larry Pursley had in the Ketchikan Daily News. I'm sure it will go statewide, and I'm sure we'll see it in the ADN, Juneau, and elsewhere. But it was an op-ed that first appears now in the Ketchikan Daily News. The headline in Ketchikan was "Permanent Fund Troubles Make for Sad Music." And here's the pitch in the middle of the op-ed. The annual withdrawal from the earnings reserve is limited by law to protect the fund from excessive drawdowns on political whims. It all works well if the fund earns sufficiently higher investment returns than inflation, but inflation has been high, and there is no guarantee that investments always will be higher or high enough. That's the future that confronts Alaskans today. It is possible that the fund could run short of spendable money in the earnings reserve in the years ahead to cover its annual transfer to the general fund. That's the transfer that helps pay for everything Alaskans enjoy, such as public services, no state income tax or sales tax, and the beloved permanent fund dividend. And then he goes on to say, to prepare for that future, to prevent that future, we need to merge the earnings reserve and the corpus together, so that when the permanent fund is not earning a sufficient amount to cover the draws on it, we'll still be okay, because we can draw into the corpus. And that's the pitch. He's not hiding it. The purpose of and really none of these articles are hiding, because they can't, because that's the only purpose. The real purpose of merging the two is to get your hands on the corpus. So when the earnings reserve isn't earning enough, then you can draw into the corpus and keep the good times going. It is the same pitch as we heard when in the early 20 teens, when we started in on the statutory budget reserve. Oh, we need to draw it down because we aren't getting enough from oil for a while, so we need to start drawing down the statutory budget reserve. And then when we ran the statutory budget reserve dry, it was the pitch on the constitutional budget reserve. Oil's coming back. Don't worry about it. Oil revenues are coming back. We just need to draw into the constitutional budget reserve for a while to tide us over until that shows up. Never showed up. Drain the constitutional budget reserve. Now we're $20 billion in the hole. And then we started in on the PFD. In the middle 20 teens, we started in on the PFD. Oh, don't worry. Oil's coming back, but we need to cut the PFD for a while to tide us over, now that we've drained the statutory budget reserve and the constitutional budget reserve. We've heard this story all the way through. And shame on us if we're not getting the message. The message is, look, top 20% don't want to pay taxes. The oil companies don't want to pay taxes. The non-resident industries, tourism, fishing, they don't want to pay taxes. So we just need to go drain these other accounts for a while to tide us over until something else shows up. Now the pitch is we just need to drain the corpus occasionally for a while until returns come back. Well, there's no guarantee returns are ever coming back. I mean, part of the problem is the POMV is set at 5%. And the permanent fund board, the permanent fund corporation, isn't earning 5%. That's the problem. Now, in addition to that, they drained out $8 billion with two $4 billion draws in the early 2020s. And they're playing accounting games, rigging the accounting so that it looks like the earnings reserve is lower than it really is. In addition to all that, but the at the end of the day, the real concern that's being expressed here is, oh my gosh, we can't get to 5%. And so what we need to do is merge the two to be able to get to the corpus. We can see this train coming. And just like K through 12, they're foreshadowing it. They're writing about it.
Yeah.
They're letting us know this train is coming. And they're now personally is even being open about the purpose. The purpose is no state income or sales tax. So it's the top 20% don't have to pay. Non-resident industries don't have to pay. Oil companies don't have to pay. We're just going to take it out of the pockets of future Alaska families by starting to drain the corpus down.
Yeah.
And shame on us. Shame on us if we don't say, okay, we see your game and we're going to stop it.
Yeah, I mean, part of this is, I mean, look, this is a game of like 3-card Monte or shell game right in front of you. And you're watching the stuff switch back and forth. And you're like, I'm sure I understand what's going on here. I'm sure I know where the king is. I'm sure I know where the P is under the shell. I'm sure I know where it is. And then they go, whoop. Oh, it's not there? Okay, it's so confusing. I mean, they're just doing it out in the open. This piece from Persili, again, I think it's hysterical because it points out the legislature cannot spend the fund's principal, and then goes on, like you said, that first sentence, the annual withdrawal from the earnings reserve is limited by law to protect the fund from excessive drawdowns on political whim. That's to protect the earnings reserve, let alone the corpus of the fund. And then in his final plea, it's like, oh, but let's put a constitutional amendment out there so that we can draw it down for political whims, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to because, oh, here's a thought. Hear me out. Maybe we should live within our means. Maybe we should, shrink the size of what we got going on to live within what we've got. Oh, and by the way, your accounting gimmicks of not counting the $8 billion you put in the last 4 years that was supposed to be for future inflation proofing, and now you don't count it against inflation proofing at all. So that's how you have a crisis. I mean, Brad, this is artificially manufactured from so many different ways, but the average Alaskan is not going to dig down into this and not understand this. And that's what they're counting on.
Yeah, exactly right, Michael. I mean, exactly right. And it's incumbent on us to explain this at every chance we get. Again, you can see this coming from miles away. Here's another piece from it. The legislature and governor need to stop fighting over the amount of the dividend and place a constitutional amendment before voters to eliminate the line between spendable and non-spendable money in the fund, and include a constitutional limit on how much can be spent in any 1 year to protect the savings account for the future. We've already got a protection for the savings account. That's what the earnings reserve does. The earnings reserve is sort of like the last line of defense that under the Constitution can't be breached. You can't get at the corpus of the fund. All you can do is get it at the earnings reserve. And so that's the line of defense. Now they want to, throw away that line of defense and said, oh, we'll give you another one, a constitutional limit on how much can be spent. Well, it will be wrong. Whatever the number is will be wrong because the markets will produce a return or the incompetence of the permanent fund board, which is what we've been dealing with the last several years, that will produce a return, whatever the return is. And the return won't be the amount that's set by the constitutional limit. It's likely to be less. Here's the trick I'm waiting for. The trick I'm waiting for is for them to start talking about what the constitutional limit is going to be. And like Ben Carpenter's proposed PFD amendment, which had some rationale for why he did it there. But like that, they'll say, and the constitutional limit on the draw will be set by statute. And we'll constitutionalize whatever's going to be in statute. Okay, that's it.
Right,
That's
right.
The door is now open.
Yeah, because we can make it 8%, 9%, 12%. We can do whatever we want. We've got to have it now. We need it. Pay no attention to what's behind card number 3. I mean, it's insane. It is absolutely insane. But this is where we're going. And now they're talking about it more and more. And again, they're not even really hiding it anymore. This is, what is going on.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, quickly here.
And we need to be looking at candidates on this issue. You and I have talked about this before, but one of the questions we need to be asking candidates as we head toward the general election is, where do you stand on this proposal to merge the two funds together? Because there's going to be a push to do it in this legislature and in subsequent legislatures. And just like K through 12, they're going to keep banging on the door, and we need to know where the candidates are ahead of time.
All right. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top 3. We are going to continue here in just a moment, but we've got to take a break. Got to pay those bills. Know what I mean? We'll be back with more in just a moment. Number 2 comes up right after this. Don't go anywhere. Don't forget, you can check us out as well. If you got any modern device, you can check us out on Facebook, YouTube, or Rumble as well, where we simulcast the show and you can hang out during the commercial breaks and talk with the chat room. We'll be back with more of the Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show, because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, we're in the commercial break finally. I had to mash the button extra hard this morning. We're ready to go. We're continuing on. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Harold says, my concern is the permanent fund is stalled during a time of record markets. Why is that? The fund value should be over $90 billion, but it didn't increase with the markets. Why? I think Brad just alluded to it. This mess we've got with the permanent fund, board, that they've been dabbling, that the board is, making suggestions or investments, or, Rubenstein's in there trying to gild her cage with things that's going on and everything else. I mean, they need some professionals in there who are doing it not for glory, but for the size of the fund. That's what the health and size of the fund, instead of for, again, lining their own cages.
Yeah, I've been doing some work. It won't be in this week's column, but it'll be in a future Friday column in the Landmine. I've been doing some work comparing the performance of our fund to the Norwegian fund, because that's sort of the gold standard out there about sovereign wealth funds. And the Alaska fund has outperformed the Norwegian fund, not by a huge amount, but has outperformed it, generally speaking, since 2010, up to about the last 3 years. And in the last 3 years, we've fallen behind the Norwegian fund in terms of performance. We've also fallen behind, if you look at the permanent fund's own benchmarks, the 3 benchmarks that they publish their results compared to. We've fallen behind in the last 3 years. And so there's something that's happened in the last 3 years. And if you look at it, what you're seeing is the board, the makeup of the permanent fund board being converted during Dunleavy's term, being converted from guys in gray suits and white shirts with green eye shades who don't have public profiles and just sort of go about the business of focusing on investments, have knowledge about and focus on the business of going about and making investments for return. You've seen the transition from that to people like Jason Bruni and Ellie Rubenstein and Craig Richards and others who have political connections, but have Adam Crum, who have political connections, but have no knowledge. I mean, even they admit, other than for Ellie, they admit they have no knowledge about the investment industry and about what it takes. They're just there because, they have political connections. And in the case of Crum and Bruni, they're running for governor. So they want to, get their profile up. And so we've changed the composition of the board. And I wrote a column a few weeks ago that said, is the chaos on the permanent fund board costing Alaskans? And the conclusion was yes, because with these personalities and with all the infighting that they've started to do with each other and all of the, the stuff that Ellie was doing in terms of promoting her own investments and her own investment advisors, we've seen a decline in the returns of the fund below the level, below their own benchmarks, and then below compared to the Norwegian fund. So it's not always been the case that the permanent fund's been this way, but it's certainly been the case, increasingly the case, the last 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and Donna is in agreement 100%. The board is pushing risky investments so it can play with big shots like Ellie's dad. I mean, that's the thing. It's become the sex appeal of the board instead of the work, the daily grind of the work of building the fund up and doing what needs to be done in the right way. It's all about the PR, the visibility, the look what I can put on my resume kind of thing with all those political players in there.
I don't know if it's because they want to, it could be two things at once. It could be because they want to play with Ellie's dad, but it also, I think it's more, they just want their profile up. The members of the board, especially Crum and Bruni, want their profile up because they have aspirations that go beyond the board, and they want their public profile. So they're not trained to look after the nuts and bolts, and they're certainly not looking after the nuts and bolts. And I think that explains, as much as wanting to play with the big shots, I think the fact we don't have people in there who are knowledgeable and experienced in the investment industry, I think that explains what's going on.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. The weekly top 3 continues. The Michael Duke Show. Please like and share. If you're over on Rumble, please make sure you follow on Rumble so we can get those numbers up. Let's get to it. Here we go.
Brad Keithley joins us every week to discuss oil, gas, and the economic forecast of Alaska. It's the Michael Dukes Show.
The weekly top 3 continues with Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, and I played that little liner there because it's true. The economic forecast, oil and gas. What is the oil and gas industry not telling us, Brad? Because there's been a lot of chatter. And I know Kara Moriarty and others have been out there pushing really hard on some stuff. But what are they not telling us right now?
Yeah, as lawyers, you're trained to look as much for the material, the omission of material fact, as you are to look for the material fact, the admission of material fact. That the omission is sometimes more important than the admission of material fact. And it's interesting. I've been following. Tim Bradner has an op-ed in the ADN talking about the oil industry, and has a paragraph in there that says Pikka and Willow won't bring back the state oil revenue boom of the 1980s. These aren't Prudhoe Bay type fields, but the new oil will help from Pikka and Willow. And then there's an article in Peninsula Clarion about Kara Moriarty, who's the head of AOGA, the Alaska Oil and Gas Association, a presentation she made down in Kenai about how important the industry and what the industry is doing. And again, leaving the implication with Pikka and with Willow that we're on our way back to have an oil revenue resurgence. The omission of material fact that they're making is that that's not what happens. We've talked about on the show before, but it's important to keep in mind that when you look at the Department of Revenues, not stuff I've made up, not stuff anybody else has made up, but the state's official forecast, the Department of Revenue's forecast. When you look at the Department of Revenue's forecast, they're certainly picking up in the production side of the forecast. They're certainly picking up this boom that everybody's talking about in terms of production volumes. They have, by the end of the forecast period, which is 2032, I think is what we're using now, they have production above 600 million a day, 600,000 barrels a day, and we're below 500,000 right now. So they have a significant boom in production volumes. But when you look at the Department of Revenue forecast, oil revenues, which is where it's important to Alaskans, where those production volumes turn into actual dollars, oil revenues stay flat across the entire period. And in fact, the two components of oil revenues that are most closely tied to production levels, royalties and production tax, go down slightly. The only reason it's staying flat is because of the corporate income tax, the petroleum corporate income tax on petroleum companies. That's making up the difference in keeping it flat, but it's no more than flat across that period of time. So when the oil industry talks a lot about, we got these new production volumes coming on, all's going to be right with the world. We're not going to be back to Prudhoe days, but all's going to be right with the world. We got these big fields coming on. Isn't that great? And isn't, all this spinoff that's occurring because of that in terms of construction jobs and in terms of economic activity, isn't all that great? Well, it's great for some people. It's great for those in the industry. It's great for the portion of the construction industry that's tied to oil. But for the state as a whole, it's not so great. For the state as a whole, because of the way some provisions of SB 21 operate, it's keeping revenues flat across that period. The revenues aren't growing in the same way.
Kerry Moriarty goes on to talk about, it's going to be 600,000 barrels a day by 2029, or whatever. But that's great. But how many of those barrels are we getting paid on? That's the biggest question. And that's, they're not talking about that. They're talking about gross production numbers, not the revenue.
Yep, exactly right, Michael. And so you get candidates out there that say, "Oh, don't worry about this. Oil's coming back, and revenues will be fine." Well, that's not what the Department of Revenue forecast tells us. And there's a couple of ways. I mean, we could adjust. I wrote a column on this. We could adjust SB 21. I mean, SB 21 wasn't perfect. It was good at the time. It did the job of getting more investment in the state, but it's not perfect. And 10 years later, we're seeing some of the imperfections in it, and you can make some adjustments in SB 21, which would fix that problem and tie the state's revenues from oil to the increase in production volume, and the state actually would benefit from the increased production volume. But that's not what's going on. And the oil industry, you never admit facts that go against your interests, I suppose. But the oil industry is not being honest with Alaskans about that fact. They're touting, and Bradner sort of makes this tie. He's done that in another, in an article in the Frontiersman at one point, sort of makes this tie between production volumes and revenue. We'll be okay because production volumes are going up. They're not being honest with Alaskans. They're omitting the material fact that there isn't a link going forward between substantial increased production volumes and revenues. And we need to be honest. Alaskans need to know that, because we need to know that this increase in production volume isn't turning into a bonanza for the state. And the consequence is, as spending goes up, we say, well, spending needs to go up by inflation. We can't short spending on inflation. Can't short K through 12. Can't short the other things on inflation. As spending goes up by inflation, oil revenues are staying flat against that, and so the deficit is increasing. The difference between those two is increasing. And under current policy, guess who takes the hit from that? Well, it's middle and lower income Alaska families through increased PFD cuts. That's the grease that gets used to keep fueling increased spending while oil continues to not reflect increases. And so we just need to be honest with Alaskans about that.
Right. I mean, and I would agree with that. And interestingly enough, it came back in the end of this article in the Clarion talking about Kara Moriarty and her presentation. They're still pushing for the one thing, which of course they're still pursuing royalty relief. I thought that was the biggest admission in that whole article. That's what they're still pushing for. We're not taking in as much money as we were before. Oh, and by the way, they want more money. Now, people will argue, well, royalty relief isn't really money because it's an absence of revenue. So it essentially has to be offset by something else. So it is more money. I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah, exactly right. It's exactly right. It's the state subsidizing it. Instead of the state giving them money, it's the state subsidizing them on the cost side by relieving them of certain costs that they otherwise owe the state. Believe me, to producers, it's as good as money in the bank, because you don't have to pay certain costs. I mean, you get somebody else to pay your costs And in this case, it would be middle and lower income Alaska families are going to pay the cost. There's one other point I want to make on this, Michael, and it's a point that I don't get a lot of popularity points for making, but it's one that we need to understand. What's really going on as we keep oil revenues flat, but oil revenues climb, and all these construction contracts and all the other things that are going on in the industry climb, all the spending climbs. What's really going on is Alaskans are subsidizing the industry by not getting the same level of increase in revenues that the oil companies are getting as a result of increased production. And Alaskans are really, saying, okay, well, the effect of this is Alaskans are saying we'll forego revenue from the increased production. You, the oil companies, can keep all that increased revenue that otherwise would come to us if we had a tax system that matched the increase in production tax. You, the oil industry, can keep all of that. And the oil industry says, okay, well, we'll buy off, portions of the state by giving them construction contracts and by making them better. So portions of the state, those tied to the oil industry, get better as a result of the construction contracts and other things the oil companies are giving out. The oil companies get better, their stockholders get better, and it's all coming at the expense of Alaskans, mom and pop Alaskans, not getting the benefit of increased revenue tied to production. I'm not talking about increasing the tax. I'm talking about the tax staying at least level or rising in the same manner that production volumes are rising. And by Alaskans foregoing that through the way that SB 21 is operating now, by Alaskans foregoing that, they're subsidizing the industry and subsidizing those who benefit from the industry in the state. It's a wealth transfer, if you will, from the portion of the state that's not tied to the industry, realizes its benefits through royalty and production tax. It's a wealth transfer from that portion of the state over to the portion of the state that's tied to the oil industry and the oil industry stockholders.
Well, and just for a second, we got about 2.5 minutes here, Brad, left of this segment. But I mean, do a comparative because, again, you're from the oil and gas. For those of you who don't know, Brad is a former retired oil and gas attorney. So he's had pretty intimate knowledge of how these things work on the backside. I mean, compare this to, like places Qatar and the Near East and Australia. I mean, they keep saying, well, Alaskans got to play fair. Well, I mean, I know that there's many places out there where the landholders, the state, the governments, whatever, I mean, they're taking a significant chunk. I mean, much more than Alaska is in the long run of those revenues. And those oil companies are still working to this day to pump oil out of the ground out there. Are we being treated fair in that regard? Are we kind of a different critter? What's going on?
Well, we've made ourselves a different critter. In Texas, North Dakota, other places, production tax is calculated on the gross royalty. Or on the gross revenues. And so those places, as gross revenues go up as a result of production going up, those places realize the benefits of that. In other places, the Middle East and elsewhere, the country, the nation owns a portion of the equity. And so they get the benefit of that through, I mean, they're they pay part of the development costs. They own a portion of the production outright. And so they get the benefit of that through their ownership share. Alaska sort of put itself in a unique position. It's not at all like the lower 48 system. We have a net profit system for our production tax. It's not at all like the lower 48 system. It's styled more like an international system, but the problem is most of the international locales also have, like Norway, they also have a state-owned oil company that's getting a portion of the equity and earning a portion of the benefit, and then in that fashion. And we don't have that, so we're sort of out here in the middle, in a unique way. That would be okay if the tax structure and the royalty structure kept pace with the increased revenues coming from increased volumes. It would be okay if we had a structure that did that. But what's happened is some of the provisions of SB 21 are now working against that and working in a way that reduce that share that the state's getting. So we're not like the lower 48. We're not structured to get the benefits in the way the lower 48 does, or take the burdens of the way the lower 48 does. We look more like an international, but we're not really structured in the same way as an international, because we don't have a state-owned oil company that's getting a portion of the benefits through in that fashion. So we're just sort of wandering out here in a way that's coming back to bite us.
It's like we're the cream of the crop, right? We're not the bottom of the top and the top of the bottom kind of thing. It's like we're in the middle trying to hybridize everything, and it doesn't work as well. That's for sure. All right, Brad Keithley continues with us. The Michael Duke Show, the weekly top 3. Number 3 is up next on your home for Common Sense Radio.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, Brad Keithley, Alaskans Faux Sustainable Budgets, continues with us, the weekly top 3. I think that's the biggest thing, Brad, is that we continue, we treat the oil taxes in a way. We did this with ELF, we did this with ACES, we did this now with SB 21. We treated it like it's a forever thing instead of modifying it as things, go on, or just finding a system that works in other areas and adopting it that way. We have to make it our own, and we're always trying to course correct. It's one way or the other. Either the state's taking way too much and squashing development and exploration, or on the other side, we're giving away the farm in one way or the other. Maybe SB 21 came the closest in the fact that it's kind of trying to, to thread the needle. But the bottom line is it needs adjustment. The oil's leaving the state. It's a finite resource, and we're really not getting the Alaskans' fair share. There should be a little bit more in there on that.
Yeah, it's funny, Michael. I mean, the argument for not going and messing with the oil tax is because the industry needs stability. It needs to know what the rules are. These are long-lived investments. It needs to know what the investment structure is at the time they make that they can rely on, the payout that they calculate based upon an oil tax structure over the term of the investment, over the term of the payout. And so they need that stability. And I don't disagree with that so much. But the stability, that sort of runs one way, right? I mean, when we had ACES, which took way too much and really did depress investment. When we had ACES, the industry was right up in the legislature's face saying, we need to change this. Yes, we know what the rules are. The rules are bad. We need to change this. And I know we say we need stability, but we need better stability than this. And the legislature said, okay, we understand that. So let's develop something new. And now that we figure out that, over the term of its life and the way that things have evolved and the way the industry is implementing it, now that we know that SB 21 isn't producing sort of the same share of revenues that we anticipated at the front end of it, and we can see that over the next decade as we look at the revenue forecast. The state should be saying, the chair of the House Resources Committee and others should be saying, well, we need to adjust SB 21 to get it more in line with the expectations that we had at the time it was passed back in 2013. We're not changing it in the sense that we're trying to redo the perceptions we had or the goals we had in 2013. We're changing it to be certain on the state side that they continue to match those goals. But now the industry is saying, oh no, once it's locked in, it needs to stay locked in forever because we counted on it forever. Just like Hillcorp says, we came up here and you didn't have a corporate income tax on S corps. So we came up here and we relied on not having a petroleum corporate income tax on S corps. And yes, we know we're the only one in the state. And yes, we know that it puts a hole in the state's revenues. And yes, we know that in the back rooms, we sort of chuckled and said, yeah, maybe we'll get away with this. Let's keep arguing for it. But out front they say, we need to continue to keep this loophole because that's how we make money. The state has a right to change things, and I'm not suggesting that the state go back to ACEs.
They have a fiduciary responsibility to change things.
Right. I'm suggesting we just go back to the perceptions or to the concept we had in 2013 of how we shared the risk and the reward of the oil industry going forward. It was a pretty good concept at the time, but things aren't working in the way that I think, plays that out. You can see that clearly by the stagnation in oil revenues as oil production climbs. And we need to go back and address that. In other jurisdictions, I mean, in Britain, they set the petroleum tax in their budgets once every 2 years or once every, periodically. They redo them in their budgets. We don't do that. We've got more stability than that, but it's not like in the world, people don't change their oil regimes. I'm not suggesting we change the oil regime. I'm suggesting we refine tune it to get back to the objectives we had in 2013 when SB 21 was enacted.
Right. I mean, because it makes sense. If you go down 10 years down the road and you realize this isn't working quite as intended and it's benefiting one party more than the other, you should be able to revisit it and say either, if the state's getting more than it should, then that should be revisited. If the oil, it should be viable. But instead, we've got a lobby that's out there saying, please don't touch it because we'll leave the state, take our bat and ball and go home. And you're like, well, that's great, except it's our baseball diamond. You can take your bat and ball all you want, but we own the diamond. So somebody else will come in and do it if that's what we need to do. Anyway, the weekly top three continues. Brad Keithley, our guest, The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Again, don't forget to like and share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. Let's get to it. Here we go.
Public enema number one. Oh, wait, sorry. Public enemy number one, which makes more sense. On the other hand, he's a little bit of a pain in the Michael Duke Show.
That's not me. That's Brad. Okay, you just know he's a pain in someone somewhere is squealing like a pig because they're like, ow, ow, ow. Anyway, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, our guest, the weekly top three. On to number three, who is the fastest hour in radio for sure. Brad, the K-12 lobby. I mean, we were talking about this earlier. They're not even trying to hide it. And the K-12 lobby, I think, feels emboldened in the same way. They're not even trying to hide what's going on. They're just like, give us more. That's all we hear. More. In fact, my favorite quote out of everything that we heard before here, defunding public education has been devastating for our schools. Defunding public education? When did we defund public? I mean, if a veto of an increase is a defunding, we've got some serious critical analytical thought problems going on. If you're saying we gave you a $200 million increase, but we vetoed $100 million of it, it's still an increase. We're not defunding schools, but that's what they're saying.
Yeah, I want to sort of talk a little bit about a subset of the whole K through 12 issue. There's a lot of stuff to talk about K through 12, spending too much, declining student population, increasing spending, all sorts of anomalies like that. But I want to talk about a subset, and that subset is who pays for this increase in spending that the K through 12 lobby wants. There was a couple of opinion pieces in the past week. I mean, sort of they're increasing the pace as we go through the election cycle and head toward the session. But there were a couple of opinion pieces in the ADN, at least the past week. One was the title was "Put Students Before Politics and Funding Alaska Schools." Another was "Alaska Schools Need Our Help." And both of those were, in different words, all discussions about how we need more pay teachers more. We need more money in schools. We need more teachers to cut down class sizes. We need there's all sorts of reasons that we need more money. In a few of the earlier columns, they at least pay the industry, the lobbying for this at least paid attention to the issue of who do they propose pay for this increased spending. There was one editorial I recall in the Frontiersman where it went through the same sort of argument about why we need increased spending. And at the end, it says, and we need to pay attention to who pays for this. We should ensure that all Alaskans pay. We should look at taxes and other things. At least they were honest about it. It was at the end. It wasn't a big part of the conversation, but at least it was in there. Now they're not even talking about that. Now it's just give us more. And here's what they're essentially saying. They're saying we don't care where it comes from. We know it's going to come from PFD cuts because that's where it's come from. We're not trying to stop that. Just give us more. And they're essentially throwing middle and lower income Alaska families off the boat. They're saying, look, we need more. We need more spending. We need more for us. We know that the top 20% doesn't want to pay, so we're not going to even ask them. We know that oil companies don't want to pay. We're not even going to talk about changing rates. Spending's gone up since 2013, but we haven't changed the tax rates on the oil industry since 2013. But we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about like they do in the 49 other states plus the District of Columbia. We're not going to talk about non-residents making a contribution to state revenues. We're not going to talk about that. We're just going to say we need more. And we know that more is going to come from, unless we decide otherwise, we know that more is going to come from middle and lower income Alaska families. So it's elitist in the worst possible. This argument is elitist in the worst possible way. It is elitist in terms of we deserve increased spending, and we deserve it on the backs of middle and lower income Alaska families. We're not even going to breathe a word about the top 20% oil industry and non-residents contributing to the cost of it. And it's just, I mean, it is elitist. Give us more out of the pockets of middle and lower income Alaska families. Don't touch the top 20%. Don't even talk about taxes. Don't touch the top 20%. Don't touch the oil companies, and don't touch non-residents. And that's a horrible message. I mean, it's a message about we feel entitled as the education industry. We feel entitled to more, and we're not even going to worry about it being broad-based. The more being broad-based, we're entitled to more, and we're entitled to it coming out of the pockets of middle and lower income Alaska families. Sometimes they'll talk about, look, education is important because it allows kids from middle and lower income families to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, to learn, to get ahead, to do. But when it comes to who pays for this increased spending, they don't care about it. They don't care about middle and lower income Alaska families. All they care about is getting their more and getting it, in a way that without advocating for a broader based approach in a way that's going to come from middle and lower income Alaska families. So I just find it a very troubling message. I find it a dishonest message in the sense that we need to be treated specially in terms of spending, and even though we will argue that everybody benefits from that, we're not going to charge everybody for that increased spending. It just needs to come more and more and more out of the pockets of middle and lower income Alaska families. And I think that's a very troubling message.
Well, and it's disingenuous in a lot of ways. I mean, first and foremost, why should they be treated different than any other employment sector in the state of Alaska? That's the first question. And then this argument about the BSA and how it's all about the children and class size and everything else. And we've talked about how the BSA doesn't really account for that. I mean, the BSA is about overhead and other things. They've slipped in the argument. One of the opinion pieces slipped in the argument, talked about the PERS and TERS program, highlighting the beauty of defined benefits. And I would only have stayed if defined benefits had stayed the way they were and everything else. And again, why, the big question is, and it's disingenuous, it's dishonest to basically say we need to be protected over all other employment sectors in the state. But okay, the legislature is listening to that because, again, to them, the state spend is the economy, so they've got to protect the economy.
Yep. And they've got to protect the economy at the expense of one segment of a very targeted segment of the state, middle and lower income Alaska families. I would give them some additional credibility if they at least stood up and said, we need more, and it needs to come from everybody, because everybody benefits from this. And so everybody needs to contribute, and we need to have it the revenues need to come in a broad-based way. We need to look at non-resident industries. We need to look at the oil companies who haven't had a change in their tax rates since 2013, even though spending's gone up since that period of time. We need to look at the top 20%. We need to look at it in a way that everybody contributes. But they're not saying that. I mean, we need more. And by not talking about where it comes from, not talking about who pays, they're clearly, targeting middle and lower income Alaska families, because that's where it's came from. That's where it's come from for the past several years.
Yeah. And you can see that this, of course, is going to be one of the big topics coming back. I mean, they're not letting it go until they get that target. I mean, they got a slight increase, but until they hit that target of 1413, which is, almost 2.5 times where it was at, where it's at now, almost 3 times what it was at before, that's what they're going to keep pushing on. But I mean, again, we're talking about, when you talk about doubling the BSA from where it's at today, there is no permanent fund left at that point. I mean, it's a significant amount of money at that point that nobody's asking, where does it come from? We got all these great ideas and these great programs, and nobody is asking who pays on any of them, whether it's royalty relief or defined benefits or, the teacher's pay or anything else. Nobody's asking those questions. Like I was talking about yesterday, it's this willful ignorance of, it'll never happen to us. We're too big to fail. We'll always have money no matter what. We can't be out of money. We still have checks. Kind of thing. And that's where we're at today. Finish up, Brad. We got 90
Well,
seconds.
it spreads all over the place. I mean, it's not only K through 12, it's not only the other things that you talked about. Childcare. I mean, it's the Republicans too. The Republicans have been big proponents of childcare. Subsidies for childcare or for tax credits for childcare. But again, it's who pays. Who's paying for that? And the way we've set this up, the way Republicans have set this up, is it comes from the pockets of middle and lower income Alaska families. They don't want to go broad based, because they know the top 20%, the oil companies and the non-resident industries, fishing and tourism, will push back against it if they try to broad base it. So they just keep taking it out of the pockets of middle and lower income Alaska families. And that's just, I mean, they're undermining the state. When you look at who's leaving the state, when you look at the out migration, it's occurring in the middle and lower income brackets. When you look at the working age population, it's occurring in the middle and lower income brackets. When you look at how Alaska lines up against inflation, it's working against them.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We're out of time, folks. If you got to go, don't forget to vote today. We're back with more in hour 2, dead ahead. I mean, that's the problem, Brad, is that just nobody is paying attention. I was talking about it again yesterday, this idea that somehow we'll just make it. I mean, going back to the train analogy, we know that the track is running out, that there's no more track. The track is the money, just for folks who couldn't figure that out. The track is the money, and the bridge is out. There's no more track across the bridge. There's no trestles, and they're like, hold my beer. Watch what happens here. We're gonna jump that gap. We're just gonna keep shoveling coal into it, and away we go. It's gonna be fine. And it's not gonna be fine. That's the problem. There will be some kind of catastrophic problem ahead, because we cannot control the spending, and we aren't talking about where it's coming from. And that's the biggest problem.
And they see that. I mean, personally, let's go back to segment 1. They see that bridge coming, right? I mean, they see the bridge is out. So now what they're doing is they're saying, all right, let's get into the permanent fund corpus. It's big. People won't notice if we take, a few billion here, a few billion there. Problem is they can't confine themselves to a few billion here, a few billion there. But they see that bridge is out, and so they're rapidly trying to build a new bridge to get into the permanent fund corpus under this argument that, oh my God, we're going to have a crisis if we don't merge the two accounts together, because we're not earning enough. So rather than reduce our spending to what we earn, we need to just tap into the corpus. Um, and, and again, I mean, they're not taking it from themselves. They're not taking it from the top 20%. They're not taking it from the oil companies. They're not taking it from the non-resident industries. They're taking it from future Alaskans. It's anybody. I wrote a column once. The title of it was "Anybody But Me." Anybody but let's keep spending, but let's pay for it with anybody but me. And it was about legislators, all of whom are into the top 20% now because of the pay raises they gave themselves, Mike Cronk included. It's anybody but me. Do this spending with anybody but me. Take it from middle and lower income Alaska families. Don't take it from the top 20%. Don't take it from the oil companies. Don't take it from non-resident industries. And if you do that, you just keep on spending and spending and spending because there's no pushback. There's no pushback from the donor class. There's no pushback from the oil companies. There's no pushback from the tourism and the fishing industries because they don't have to pay for it. They don't care.
It's a problem. I thought Brian said something a while ago that was good. He goes, look, no one wants a tax, but we're adults and we understand math. And that's kind of the basic idea here. We're already being taxed.
Yep.
And so if it is a tax, shouldn't it at least be equitable and across the board and make sure that everyone pays the same rate? I mean, again, nobody likes a tax. Taxation is theft, right? I mean, I'm all on that board with that. But if you're going to force me to pay a tax, shouldn't everyone have to pay a proportional tax to their income or whatever else? Shouldn't that make sense? Or at least to their consumption, if that's the worst case scenario, at least to the consumption. But somebody's got to pay something. It just doesn't come out of thin air.
Yep. But it's coming out of thin air from the perspective of legislators, all of whom are in the top 20%, from the perspective of the oil companies, and from the perspective of the non-resident industries. It's all coming out of thin air because they're not having to pay it. So childcare, yeah, that's good. Hey, our employees would love that. Our employees, most of which are in the top 20%, would love, says Conoco, would love that. Let's do childcare. Let's do a tax credit for childcare. And then I can essentially have the state pay for the childcare that I'm providing to my top 20%. I don't have to pay for it as an oil company. They don't have to pay for it because they're in the top 20%, and the non-resident industries don't have to pay for it. That's great. Let's just have more and more and more of that. The only way, in my opinion, we've talked about this before, the only way to stop this spending increase is to do the income side, the revenue side, make it broad-based. Then you have the top 20%, the donor class, and the oil companies and the non-resident industries pushing back on the increased spending. As long as they don't have to pay, we're just going to keep going down this road.
And Ron actually makes a valid point. I was talking about this again yesterday. By the time the state crashes, all of those who caused it will be gone. Because we've seen that before, right? They're here for a period of time, 15, 20 years, and then they retire to some other state because they got theirs and while the getting was good, and then we're left holding the bag on the other end. And that's the scary part, is when we're left holding the bag on the other end.
Yep. And that's what, going back to the first segment, going back to Pursley again, that's essentially what the argument is. We've run out of money. We run out of the SBR. We run out of the CBR. We're about to run out of PFDs. So let's just keep this train going by building a new bridge out there to let us get to the corpus. And, maybe that lasts 20 years. It lasts long enough for the oil companies to pay out the fields that they're investing in now, and then they're gone.
Yeah.
So they don't care.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top 3. Brad, thanks so much. You going out to vote today, or did you already vote?
Michael, I'm going out to vote today.
All right. Get it done. Don't forget. We're just getting it out there. So appreciate it, Brad. Thanks for coming on board and joining us today.
As always, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Frank says, this is a chapter out of Marxism. All pay equally. Well, you're missing the other half of that, which is to each according to his needs, meaning the government then pays you on that. That's not what this is about, Frank. I mean, I don't know what to say to you, but that's not what this is about. If you're going to have to pay, shouldn't everybody at least have a little skin in the game in that regard? I'm just asking for a friend. just asking for a friend. All right, here we go. We're going to jump back into this. The Michael Duke Show continues. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Here we go.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a
That's just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the interwebs at michaeldukeshow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Good morning, my friends. Welcome to the program. Thanks for coming on board and being part of it with us today. The Tuesday edition of the Michael Duke Show. We just finished up with Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. And the weekly top three, it was some good discussions there. And if you missed it, you can go back and listen to it on the podcast, wherever you find podcasts, including Spotify. And of course, you can go back and watch it on the replay on Facebook or YouTube or Rumble. And you could see what you missed and get the details on that. It's stuff that every Alaskan should be talking about. I mean, we should be discussing all of these questions and talking about everything that's going on in the public eye, where, most people, most average Alaskans are not really paying attention to it. Look, we have got a responsibility as, I don't know what they consider. They consider, listeners to local talk radio and stuff, they consider them to be kind of like the super voters, the people who are engaged, who understand the issues. Maybe not completely, but more so than the average rank and file person, the average, the voter. And so we have a responsibility to tell people about what's going on. This discussion around the permanent fund and the idea that by somehow merging the fund, merging the earnings reserve into the corpus, that will magically fix all the problems we've got in the state. All this upcoming stuff. Well, first of all, it's a manufactured crisis because the legislature themselves transferred $8 billion in the last 4 years over to the corpus of the fund, took it out of the spendable earnings reserve and put it in there, ostensibly to future inflation-proof the fund. Well, but they seem to have forgot the future inflation-proof part. Now they're like, well, we need more inflation-proofing and we don't have enough money to do inflation-proofing and spend government money. So it's a manufactured crisis. But acting like somehow by merging the two of these things together, we will solve all the problems of the world is just wrong, folks. Why? Because we haven't stopped the fundamental cause of this thing, right? The fundamental cause of this whole deal is like cancer treatment. Right? We're going to hit it with all this stuff. We're going to do all this, but we know there's a tumor in there that's spinning off cancer cells all over the place. So we're not going to take the tumor out. We're just going to treat the symptoms. It's still going to kill you. Right? It's still going to happen. If we open up the corpus of the fund to make it spendable by the legislature, guess what? They will spend it. How do we know? Because they have spent every available pot of money that they have had access to over the last 15, 20 years. Right? I mean, it started off with the SBR, the statutory budget reserve, required by statute to have a certain amount of money in it. It's just in case we needed it. We needed a slush fund. We spent all that. Okay. Well, now we're going to move on to the constitutional budget reserve, a similar fund, but with more money in it and a mandate that it continued to have some money in it. We still owe all that money, by the way, that we spent out of it to the Constitutional Budget Reserve. And out of that fund, we spent another, $13-14 billion? And then when that fund was drained, well, we tap into the PFD, the permanent fund dividend. That was a shall transfer. That's what we shall transfer. And instead, they started intercepting that money and taxing us there. So they have spent every easily and readily available pot of money in front of them and continued to spend more. More. M-O-A-R, more. And so now you want to talk about taking away the guide rails, taking away that separation between the legislature, the spending authority, and taking away the one barrier that keeps the seed corn fresh and safe. I mean, oil is not the number one revenue in the state anymore. We're an energy state. I keep hearing that. There's been a bunch of ConocoPhillips ads that have been running around on TV and YouTube and every place else. And it's, we've been an energy states since statehood, with our first discovery at Stevens River and blah, 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 blah. And we're an energy state. We used to derive the lion's share of all revenue from the state from oil. But what happens? We outgrew it. We continued to spend more than we were taking in. And all of a sudden we needed MOAR more. Right? We needed more. So what happens? Well, then SBR time, then inevitably to the CBR, and now to the dividend. And now every year it's been a battle to see how much they are going to deign to give us of our own money. And once that money is gone, because they always want more, say it with me, MOAR, more. When that money's gone, then what do you think is going to happen? Well, they're going to talk about a tax, right? But if the top 20% or the more wealthy or the transient or the outside workers, if they want to avoid that, then what do? Well, they do what the current tactic is. The tactic is, well, let's combine the earnings reserve and the corpus of the fund so that we can have access to that fund because, we need that. The state will, if we can't live beyond our means and what our annual draw is, then, it'll be chaos in the streets and dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. That's what'll happen. So either there will be some new form of tax because free rides die hard. And you Alaskans, you've got to pay your fair share. And, everybody else in the country does it, some kind of tax. And so you Alaskans have got to do it as well. Just everybody else does it, so you should do it as well. Or they'll strike out the constitutional restriction on the spending of the permanent fund itself. Now, what will that do? That will create the ultimate doom loop. Because if you start off with $80 billion and you're only earning 4 or 5% of that every year, and you don't limit your draw to just what the earnings is, and you start drawing 6%, 5.5%, 6.5% every year beyond what the earnings reserve has in it, then you're eating into the earning potential of that fund, thereby reducing your earnings every year. And if anybody has been watching the legislature over the last, I don't know, pick a number, 45 years, 50 years, if anybody's been watching the legislature over the last few decades, you will see there is one thing that they are exceedingly bad at, and that is pacing themselves and being conservative with the only time they were able to put money away was when they had more money than Rockefeller himself. When the oil was so high, they had money coming out of their ears and they didn't know what to do with it, so they socked it away. When they couldn't build AstroTurf fields in every, 20-person community across the state fast enough. That's the only time we've really been able to put money away. We drew down on decades of savings over the course of just a couple years. Decades of savings. So do you really think that by opening up and combining the ERA and the corpus of the fund and taking down that constitutional barrier, that prohibition from spending the corpus of the fund, the seed corn, that's like spending your retirement before you get there, to put it in perspective. That's like every month you're tapping into your IRA or your retirement fund because, well, I can't really be expected to control my spending, and I really wanted that new car, but now it's not even just a new car. Now it's just living expenses. We got some bills to pay. I got to buy some groceries, and maybe we do need that one extra big screen TV in the house or whatever it is. And you're tapping your retirement fund every month to make it happen. And you wonder what's going to happen. What's going to happen at the end? Maybe not this year with the ERA and permanent fund corpus issue. That problem may not play out in the next decade or two. It may be 2 decades before we realize how bad the problem has become. But eventually they will reach a point of equilibrium where there's not enough earning potential in the fund to even fund what we've got going on now. And so then it will be, not only have they tapped the seed corn, not only is the PFD long gone, and they're eating into the reserves that are actually earning money for the state. Well, now they'll come back to you and say, well, to avoid catastrophe, which was blatantly obvious to some of us from the very beginning before it even started, to avoid this catastrophe that's come upon us that we, shocking, didn't even think about, is we're going to have to tax you anyway. We're going to have to tax you anyway. So there will be no PFD. They'll eat into the seed corn and into the earnings potential of the fund itself, which is funding the lion's share of government now. And they'll tax us on top of it. Look, folks, I'm in it for the long haul. I want my children to stay in this state. I want my grandchildren to be born and raised and stay in this state. I want 6th generation Alaskans here in my family. I want that with all my heart. But if there's nothing here for them but more taxation and hardship, then it would make sense. I mean, people are leaving already. Why would we allow that? You don't kill the golden goose, which in this case is the permanent fund corpus. You don't strangle the goose for supper because the goose is dropping you eggs every day. You may be hungry. You may really want some goose, but you're not going to strangle it because it gives you something every day and feeds you the rest of the year. But these folks, they can't. And the worst part is, it's intentional. I mean, I'm not the sharpest guy on the planet, right? I mean, I can figure some things out, but even I can see that this is folly. That consuming the money consuming the base money that generates the majority of revenue for the state, that tapping into that or even opening it up so that it is tappable is excruciatingly dangerous. I mean, and if we don't stop it now, we're doomed and broke now, says Harold. Well, we're not doomed and broke now, but if we don't get, it's like we can see the bridges out, Harold, right? I mean, would you agree with me on that? We could see the bridges out. We're in the train, we're in the locomotive, and we've got our hand on the brake, and we could throw the brake and skid to a stop, maybe near the edge of the precipice. Or we could just keep blithely going on like, this will be fine. Fine, just fine. This will be fine. Don't worry about it. Is that what we want? All right. The next segment we're going to do up here, I'm opening up the phone lines at 319-527-3864. 319-527-3864. That's the phone line. If you'd like to call in, I'd love to hear from you. Give us a shout. Tell us who you're voting for today and why. I love to do that on election day. If just folks want to call in and spout off about their candidate and why they believe that they're the best one for it, go for it. It's primary day. Make sure that you take time out today to go out and vote. This is your time. Pick one. It's the pick one primary, the jungle primary today. You get to pick one candidate. And then in November, you'll pick 4. But today it's pick one. So go out there and get it done. We'll be back with more. Again, 319-527-3864, The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, we're in the break right now. I see Carlene is on the line from Kodiak. Hold the line, Carlene. I'll be right back to you here in just a minute. Randy says, Michael Dukes, do you want a small state income tax or not? Brad Keithley seems to want that, but I can't figure out if you want it or not. I think you say at least you want to talk about it, but do you actually want a small state income tax so as to boost up the PFD payout? Well, I mean, I think what I want, I'm not talking about a sales tax to boost the PFD. I'm talking about equitability. Do I want it? No, not really. I want the state to live within its means, but that's obviously not going to happen. Randy, you've been listening to this program a long time. You've been listening to this program for 20 years, right? I've been on the air for 25 years. And I have been talking about this spending problem for 25 years. And yet nothing has been done. Nothing continues to get done. In fact, you can't even get enough to override a veto or support a veto from a governor who wants to cut government. I cannot keep smashing my head against the wall of cutting the size and scope of government if we can't get other people in agreement with it. So maybe we have to change the tactic, Randy. Maybe we have to change the angle and plans of attack and say, look, that's not working. We can't keep sending guys across the beach to just die trying to reach the next sand pit. We just can't do that. We've got to rethink what we're doing. So if that means getting everybody involved in some kind of equitable way, putting skin in the game for everybody, then yes, we should talk about that. Do I want a tax? No. Do I want government to live within its means? Absolutely. Now, is a tax the way to do it? Maybe, but only if it's paired with a spending cap that reduces the ability of the legislature to overspend. If there is a discussion, let's say there was a public vote on a tax, should we tax ourselves? I would vote no if there wasn't some form of spending cap in place, period. End of story, full stop. Now, if there was a real spending cap, one that reduced the ability of government to spend beyond its means, if there was in it, I would definitely consider it. Because again, then everybody would have a share. It wouldn't be a question of who pays, which special interest pays, or which non-represented interest paid, like the lower 80%. It would, because then everybody would pay. I don't like tax, but if we don't stop doing what we're doing, which is smashing our face into the desk over and over and over again, cut spending, cut spending, cut spending, cut spending. We knock ourselves unconscious. We wake up and we start again, cut spending, cut spending, cut spending. I mean, that's gotten us exactly nowhere. No, it's gotten worse. It's gotten worse over the last 20 years. If we have to change our tactic, we have to take this from another angle. That's the bottom line. I mean, you could see they're setting it up to steal it. They're setting it up to take away the fund and to spend it on whatever special interest that they want to spend it on, to make sure that their special people are taken care of. The special people in this case would be government employees, their special sector that deserve extra protection from the vagaries of the free market. It's all going to go away. And we will have blithely allowed them to do it because we are stupid enough to all we do is start squawking about cutting government. I want cuts of government. The problem is you and I are in a minority, a severe minority at this point. Because everybody's figured out they can vote themselves largesse out of the public treasury. And you know what that leads to. The Michael Duke Show. Phone calls on hold right now, Barbara and Carlene. Let's get started.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
Okay, we're continuing on now on this election day. Yes, it is the primary election today. I want you to go out there and I want you to vote. I mean, if for nothing else, for the congressional race, vote for the candidate of your choice in the congressional race today. That's the one that really matters today in this pick one primary. It's pick one today. Today, you can only pick one candidate, the jungle primary. And again, of all the races that are out there, today's vote only really matters for 3 races. The congressional race and 2 of the House races have more than 4 candidates in them. Every other seat, every other race has less than 4 candidates. They're all going to the general election. But if nothing else, don't let that dissuade you. Go out and vote for the Congress critter of your choice. Go get it done. Let's go over to the phones. Carlene is down in Kodiak. Let's see what she has to say this morning. Good morning, Carlene. What's on your mind, my dear?
Okay, I voted early for Nick Begich, and then about the topics that Brad Keithley discussed today about taking, you talked about the fund. Something was left out. The PFD board have been discussing borrowing money, and that's a trend in Wall Street. People now borrow money to play the stock market. And I think that's what's going on. It seemed like the PFD went from 80 billion to 71 billion. And it just feels like it's just unstable. And if something should happen with Wall Street, a collapse or war or anything, Alaska would just they wouldn't have those good state jobs anymore. And the Permanent Fund Board, according to the Alaska Beacon, was also discussing going globally, first starting offices in Anchorage, New York City, London, Paris, Dubai, wherever.
Right, right.
So I just feel like we're leaving out a big topic that they've been wanting to borrow money. Thanks, Michael.
I appreciate it, Carlene, and you're right. I mean, that was one of the discussions, is that they wanted to basically borrow money to invest, which, again, at the rate of the interest rates of borrowing right now versus the interest rates of returns, that's kind of a non-starter for most people. They don't do it. Brad and I did talk about that, although we haven't talked about it recently, because that was a discussion that they were having last year. So we did talk about it, but you're right. It's a very dangerous idea. I'm glad you got out and voted, and I hope that more of you get out there today and vote. Let's go over here. Barbara is up in Fairbanks. Good morning, Barbara. What's on your mind?
Good morning. I'm calling in my capacity as a private citizen, obviously. I hope all callers knew that.
Okay.
So I wanted to respond to a couple of things that were on your show last Thursday that were made by a presiding officer of the Fairbanks North Star Borough Assembly running as a candidate.
Right. We had Savannah Fletcher. We had Savannah Fletcher on the program last week, who is running for office at the state level, but is currently the presiding officer of the Borough Assembly.
Right. And she made a couple of statements that were inaccurate, and I just wanted to correct the record on that. One of the things that she talked about was that the Ethics Committee had recommended punishment. That's inaccurate. I have the written record from them, and it is a public record, and they recommended no action because so many other people at the dais had a conflict of interest because they had also violated the same provision that I did. And so that was not accurate on her part to say that they recommended some kind of punishment. That was extraordinary action that she took. And in that meeting, she passed the gavel to Mindy O'Neill to declare her conflict, and then Mindy passed the gavel back to Savannah to declare her conflict, and they both ruled that the other one didn't have a conflict. What should have happened is that the gavel should have went to Mr. Roderman because Ms. Kelly was on Zoom and couldn't take the gavel. And all those conflicts should have been cleared out, and there would have been a lack of 5 to make a decision, which was the whole point of the Ethics Committee's recommendation. So that was really quite stunning that she made the comment that she made. What she didn't point out, she failed to declare a conflict of donations from the accuser's husband, Bobby Burgess, who's on the school board, as well as other family members of the complainant's family. So, and the donation that she received from the complainant was $2,500. So in total, that was a $5,000 donation from that household that went to Ms. Fletcher. Pretty close to it. And that's a very large donation if you take a look at her APOC report.
Right, for a significant donation.
That was not... It was not like she went to a fundraiser and gave her an extra $100. All right. And you could tell people who just went to the fundraiser to eat her food. And that donation was on the 15th of July, just before agenda setting. So I can draw a very clear quid pro quo there, I think. So that's one thing that she stated that was not quite accurate. The second thing she did is she mischaracterized an ordinance I had introduced. And that ordinance was not just to give tax breaks to builder buddies. That ordinance was to address some issues that contractors are facing. And they are various in nature, and a lot of them involve major infrastructure improvements. I don't know how much you've driven around town lately. We've had some great road construction, a lot of grade changes in the road. And people who had built platinum building subdivisions now have to face major road grade changes, and they have to meet these road standards that we have at the borough level. Some of them have also got to extend sewer lines in areas where suddenly now it's required to have sewage. And that's not the fault. That piece is not the fault of the borough. That's some utility issues that I don't want to dive deep in. The bottom line is you've got a big stoppage on infrastructure that is unintentionally, by the way, I think, stop new construction. And so what I was trying to do is help those builders get in a situation where they weren't paying taxes while they addressed the infrastructure upgrades to put in the houses, and they had to be at least 5 houses. And then, of course, if they sold those houses, then obviously the tax abatement would go away. Whoever bought it would have to pay the taxes. And some of the places in school districts that are under capacity, that we would have been taking property that was vacant and turning it into $1 million properties that would be earning a lot of revenue. And if you want to generate revenue, instead of a tax increase on people who are currently living here, we should be looking at increasing, growing the economy. And you don't do that by raising taxes. You do that by opening the door for new construction so you can increase your base.
What was her mischaracterization what was her mischaracterization of what you did in that bill? I guess now that we've gotten down into it, what was?
Well, she said she was saying that I was trying to be inequitable in giving tax breaks to people who were not in the same situation. And what I was trying to do is I was trying to address things that were stopping new construction that had not been obstacles in previous times. So,
well, and it's not like these things have not been done before. It's not like these things have not been done before in the name of economic growth or, economic development, where they've told, retailers and other things, we'll give you a tax holiday for X number of months or years to come in and build, and you won't have to pay taxes for this amount of time to incentivize them to do it. If you're trying to incentivize people to do new builds, or at least to work around the codes that the borough or the state has put in place, sometimes that makes it fair and equitable. If you want those houses on the tax rolls, sometimes, those kind of things have to happen. I'm for any kind of tax holiday for anybody at this point. So to me, this is much ado about nothing. I think this is something that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree too. And it wasn't just like for any old builder to like build a house or something. And she kind of made it sound like that was what it was. And that was not the case at all. It was trying to address some very significant infrastructure challenges that many builders are facing in this community, and largely because of government activity. Some of it good, some of it perhaps challenging, but nevertheless, those challenges are there. You can't legislate them away. So let's give them an abatement to see if we can spur some construction. One of the examples that I had used was a vacant lot that's only earning $430 in tax revenue a year right now, allowing that builder to do some infrastructure changes. In one case, it was just to run some sewer lines beyond what was reasonable for new construction, and it could have turned that $430 vacant lot to a lot that would have been earning, probably $50,000 a year in revenue for the borough. That would have been a huge, big change. And for us to forgive $430 a year for, 5 years or so, I thought it made sense, because in year 5, then you get a huge increase in revenue.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And it would have put children in schools where there is a declining capacity, where there's declining enrollment.
Right. Well, Barbara, hopefully you got people clarified on that. It's going to be an interesting race. We'll say that for sure. But we'll see where it goes from here. I appreciate you calling in and sounding off this morning and sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Folks, we're going to continue here. We got one final segment. Phone lines are open, 319-527-3864. Have you gone out and voted already? Did you early vote? Who did you vote for and why? feel free to tell us. I mean, if whichever candidate you decide that you want to vote for whichever office, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I may or may not pick up Chris' stories. I hate trying to fill Chris's shoes. There's just no way that I can do that in a meaningful way. But maybe we'll talk about that here as well. But we've got some phone lines open, and so we'd love to hear what you have to say. 319-527-3864. The Michael Duke Show continues. You're home for common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Back with more after this.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes.
Allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, we are in the break right now. All the lines are open. If any of you in the chat room want to call in and talk about it, feel free to do it. Fat Ray is out the door to vote, he says right now. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it. Thanks for listening this morning. Terry says she voted. She voted for Nick and Alexi Moore and Rob Yunt. Joel says he voted for Nick. Good for you guys. Good for you guys. Go out there and vote. I mean, I don't care who you vote for. I mean, I have my thoughts on who I'd like you to vote for, but, hey, you do you, boo. You go up and do that. All right. MD, who makes up the tax holiday? Well, obviously, the rest of the tax pool at large makes up any kind of tax holiday, just like they do for any kind of tax credit or tax receipt. The rest of the organization, the rest of the taxing pool has to make up for that. Again, it's a question of if you're doing it for the long term or the short term, if you're incentivizing. But I, for one, am all for tax holidays for everyone, Frank. You want a tax? You get a tax holiday, and you get a tax holiday, and you get a senior exemption, and you get a homeowner's exemption. You all get it. Why? Because then you're starving the beast. I like that. I like that even more. It is what it is. David says he voted for Nick Begich last night. Good for you guys. Again, another conversation in agreeing to have government get involved in private business. Dude, if you don't think government is already involved in private business, I mean, are you not paying attention? Have you not seen? Hello? This thing on? I mean, if you don't think the government's already involved in all your private business, then wake up. They're already there. They're involved in, forget about business. They're just involved in your private life at all levels. They're already taking money from you at every sector. Anything to get some of that money back, I'm all for. That, that's just all I can say right now. Just anything to starve the beast, I am all for. I don't want more. Frank, you're talking in circles now. I thought we don't want more government. That's the whole point. You're missing the whole point about where I'm talking about starving the beast. But, you've got a point of view and you're going to stick with it. And that's fine. Again, you do you. It doesn't make any sense. I don't want government involved in any of this, but they are. So I got to run what I brung, right? I can't drive the dream car. I got to drive what I got. So there you go. Greg said he voted for Nick and Sarah Vance. Greg's down in Homer. So Nick and Sarah Vance. Harold says he'd call in, but he can't find his phone. He says, I think my granddaughter took it with her. She does that. She wants to keep you out of trouble, Harold. That's what she wants to do. Joel said I was the only one in my precinct at the Spenard Rec Center, Spenard Rec, other than the poll workers. I have a feeling this is going to be a very low voter turnout in this primary. because people just don't know. They're still confused about ranked choice. They still don't know what's going on. Primaries, generally speaking, unless they're bolstered by the parties, are already, lower than the generals and everything else. I just don't know. It's, I know that I'm going to get 5 of us to vote today. 5 of us to vote today, and that will be about as good as we can get at this point. Harold says he's going to go vote for Nick. I'm going to go vote for Nick. Good for you. Good for you. What else we got going on here? I'm scrolling backwards to see what else. See what else people have said about here. Why did Mark B say, why would he not well, first of all, I think you mean Mark Begich. First of all, it's Nick Begich. I mean, I can't even get any respect here on a guy who can't keep come on. Nick Begich, not Mark Begich. Why would he not take any money from the trawl fishery? Because he's concerned that the trawl fishery is responsible for a lot of the bad things that are happening with the salmon runs. That was what he said. He said what they're doing is troubling, and he's not going to take any money from them, and it needs to be looked at. And it was Nick Begich, not Mark Begich. The delusion is real, says Brian. Yeah, that was from a while ago, so I don't know exactly what he was talking about, but there you go. All right, we got to go. We're jumping back into it. The Michael Dukes Show. She's going to wait till 7:59 p.m. tonight, says Harold. Then he could say, I just voted just in the nick of time. Yeah. Ha. Good point. All right, here we go. The Michael Dukes Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Let's do it. Okay, so the phone lines are open right now if you want to sound off, because today's election day. If you've already voted, early voted, because I guess, do the polls open at 7 or 8? Polls are probably open now. I think they open at 7. I think they go 7 to 7, if I'm not mistaken. But if you've already early voted, feel free to call up and tell me why and who and why. I got a lot of folks here voted for Nick Begich and Sarah Vance. Jeffrey voted for Begich and Snodgrass and Kronk. David Boyle voted for Nick last Friday, he said. Terry says she voted for Nick and Alexi Moore and Rob Yunt out in the Valley. Joel said he voted for Nick. A lot of folks out here. But even if you didn't vote for Nick, if you voted for Nancy or you voted for Nancy's girl, that would be Mary Peltola. If you feel free to dial it up. Let's tell me why. Tell me what, how that's going to fix the problem. Tell me how you're going to fix all the world's problems in the next 9 minutes. We're going to make it all work too. All right. 319-527-3864, 319-527-3864. Would love to hear what you guys have to say as we continue to wrap it up. I see that, I see Randy's on the phone. Oh, that'll be fun. You ready for this? Let's jump into it with Randy to see what he has to say. Good morning, Randy.
Hello there, Mike. I appreciate that you talked a little bit about what your thoughts are on a state income tax, a small state income tax. You also mentioned about a spending cap. I agree with you. It'd be good to have a spending cap and to reduce spending. But I was kind of curious. It seemed like what you said, I think you said it during the break, you said if you had your druthers, you would vote for a state income tax if there was a state spending cap, but you would not vote for a small state income tax if there was no spending cap. And I didn't quite fully understand that. If we had a spending cap, it would be kind of like we wouldn't need a state income tax. And so why would you want to vote for a state income tax if we had a spending cap?
Well, see, part of the problem. Hold on a second, Randy. Sorry. Part of the
Go
problem. Part of the problem is that it needs to be a holistic approach. So it really, and I guess maybe I should clarify, it needs to be a state spending cap. It needs to be a constitutionally mandated PFD, either in statute of the amount there, like Ben Carpenter had, or a formula baked into it. It needs to have some other form of revenue talked about. You're right. We need a spending cap, period, full stop. That needs to happen. Now, you're right in the fact that if we did have a spending cap, it would at least a real constitutional spending cap. It would at least restrict the amount that government could grow on any given year. Why would I consider doing some form of tax on top of that, whether it's an income tax or a sales tax or whatever else? Because again, it would force them, if there was a constitutional mandate on the PFD and everything else, it would force them to reduce their spend on other things and do what they're statutorily obligated to do, or in this case would be constitutionally obligated to do, which is to give Alaskans their fair share of money and stop stealing it from them. That would be the reason why I would be able to justify that. A spending cap in and of itself would be a great start. But I think, as the Fiscal Policy Working Group said, it needs to be done holistically. You need to have all the pieces in place on the board, all ready to go. So you need to have a spending cap. You need to have a constitutional protection for the PFD in some form. You need to have cuts. You need to have increase to the oil company take. For our oil, we need to get a little bit more from that. You need some kind of, probably tax revenue component. You need all of those things working together. That's the only way you're going to do it, because in a way, voting for an income tax after a spending cap went in would claw back some of that money. If there was a constitutional protection for the PFD as well, it would claw back some of that money for the PFD that has been taken away, that's affecting the lower income earners. I know you send your PFD back every year. You don't need it. That's fine. There are plenty of families out there that do, and they really could use the full statutory amount that we did for 30 or 40 years before the legislature decided in their infinite wisdom to tap into it and use it to grow the size of government. That's what needs to happen.
Well, it sounds to me like, when you boil it all down, that the reason that you would like to have a small state income tax, if there was a spending cap, is for the purpose of boosting up the size slightly of the PFD. Is that the case? That's why you want a small state income tax to boost
I think that would be a fringe
of the PFD?
I think it would be a fringe benefit, and it's not a boosting of the PFD. It's a clawing back. I mean, we're supposed to be receiving a percentage of the 5-year rolling average of the PFD, and they have been taking it every year since 2017. So it's not a boosting of the PFD, it's a return to normalcy of the PFD. And again, along with all those other pieces and parts. And then, of course, if there was an income tax, there would also be an incentive for people in the upper income levels, as Brad talks about, that top 20%, to maybe take a little bit of a closer look at state government. Maybe if they got hit with a tax too, and they'd be like, well, I don't want my money to be spent on, program X, Y, or Z. Okay, there's an opportunity here. But it has to be holistic. It can't just be one thing. It can't just be an income tax. It can't just be, a PFD mandate without any other way to pay for it. It can't just be, at this point, cuts. It can't just be the oil company's got to shoulder the whole burden. It's got to be holistic in all ways.
Well, as I've said in the chat room before, I fear very much having a state income tax at the same time that we have a dividend, because I think a dividend in the business world is where a company has surplus money after they've paid all their bills, and then they pay out a dividend to their shareholders. And so what I'm afraid of is if we have an income transfer loop going on where hardworking guys in the private sector, like myself, if I may say so, have to pay out money to the government so that that government can then pay an indolent person who's not working free cash money. And I think that destroys the honest and pure nature of an honest dividend, which is what we have now. We have an honest dividend now, and it's going to turn it into a public assistance payment, which I don't agree with.
Well, again, the dividend is kind of a misnomer because, again, it's a payout of, it's not, it's not like a business. It is a sovereign wealth fund, right? It's not like a business. And just because they decided to intercept some of that money doesn't make the taking of it right, Randy. That's the thing. And it is the people's money. And you and I are never going to agree on this because you don't believe it's the people's money. You believe it's all the government's money and that they should have fair share to spend it. And if they spend it on government, then that benefits the people. And that's what you believe, that that's the benefit, that they couldn't do as well on their own with that money, that it's better that the government spend it. And you're acting like you're not being taxed right now. You are. In fact, you're being taxed even more because you're sending your PFD payment back to the government. So you're getting the full tax, not even the partial tax that the rest of us are. So we are being taxed. And I know you're going to say, well, it's not officially. Matt Berman, the professor of economics at UAA, says it's a tax. I'm going to take his word for it. If it's not a true tax, it's a de facto tax.
Well, I hope you agree it's not a true tax anyway, I hope.
Well, it's not a true tax in the terms of the words that we receive the money and then we got a tax bill, but it's a withholding. It's our money and they took it before we ever saw it. That's a tax. I mean, that's the thing. That's our money that they took and intercepted before it ever hit our bank account. That is a tax, whether it's officially recognized as it, but it has the effect of a tax. And like I said, as much as I respect you, I respect Matt Berman as an economics professor more in this arena, and he says it's a tax. It's a tax. That's the thing.
Well, I think it would be hard to find any other economist that would agree with that.
Okay, well, you go look and tell me if you could find any other economist that disagrees with that. A taking of money before people get it is a tax. That's how it works, Randy. I mean, as much as you want to wish that it's not, and you want to justify your position, I mean, I can't take you seriously because you don't even believe that the dividend is the people's money, right? That is our fair share of the earnings for our economic, for our resource wealth. We all own it collectively. I didn't write the damn Constitution, but there it is. That's how it works. Like I said, I'm not trying to drive the car I didn't, bring. I'm running what I brung. They gave me a communistic, socialistic constitution. I'm living within it. But we should at least follow the rules. All right, we got to go. The Michael Duke Show continues tomorrow. Mike Cronk, possibly Nancy Dahlstrom. We'll see how that works out for hour 2. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. We will see you tomorrow, folks. Get out there and vote. Do it now. Have a great day. Okay, well, and here's Barbara. Barbara's an economist. It's a de facto tax that distributes money based on political power rather than population. Randy, I'm an economist, and I agree with Berman on this. I mean, it is what it is. You could try and split hairs a million ways, but the bottom line is the government takes the money and spends the money because we're not smart enough to do it on our own. That's what it comes down to. All right, my friends. Well, I got to go. Busy day today. Lots of stuff happening, and I got to go vote. So thank you for coming on board. Don't forget to share the show. If you haven't shared it today, there's only 17 likes. I don't know how many shares. But if you haven't shared it, there's 40 of you in the various chat rooms right now, plus another dozen on Rumble. There's only 4 on Rumble now. Anyway, go share it. Share it. Let's get people out there. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Be kind, love one another, live well.
Goodbye.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.
Bye.